I learned to become invisible the way other women learn to embroider or play the pianoforte, with patience and necessity, and the quiet understanding that my survival depended upon it. What I never expected was that the very man I hid from would be the one to finally see me, and that his seeing would undo us both in ways neither of us could have imagined. My name is Eleanor Whitmore, and for 2 years I served as a chambermaid in Ashford Manor, the grandest estate in all of Devonshire. I was 23 years old when this story begins, though I felt decades older, worn thin by secrets and sleepless nights, and the constant weight of fear that pressed against my chest like a stone. I had learned to move through the great house like a ghost, to anticipate needs before they were spoken, to lower my eyes whenever the master of the house entered a room. The Duke of Ashford was not a cruel man, not in the way some noblemen were cruel, but there was something in his presence that made my heart race with a terror I could not name. Perhaps it was the way silence followed him like a shadow. Perhaps it was the grief that hung about his shoulders like a cloak he could never remove. Or perhaps, if I am honest with myself now, it was something else entirely. Something I refused to acknowledge in those early days when I still believed I understood the boundaries of my own heart. Sebastian Ashford had been a widower for 5 years when I entered his service. His wife, the beautiful Lady Charlotte, had died in childbed, and the infant son she struggled to bring into the world had followed her into death mere hours later. The servants spoke of it in hushed whispers when they thought no one was listening. They said the Duke had not smiled since that terrible night. They said he had dismissed the midwife and the physician and locked himself in his study for 3 days, and when he finally emerged, something essential had been extinguished behind his eyes. I believed them. I had seen enough of grief in my own life to recognize its particular devastation, the way it hollows a person from the inside until they are nothing but a shell going through the motions of living. But I had no time to dwell on the sorrows of dukes. My own sorrows were quite sufficient to occupy every waking thought and most of my dreams as well. My mother was dying. Margaret Whitmore had been the strongest woman I ever knew. She had raised me alone after my father abandoned us when I was 6 years old, working her fingers to the bone as a seamstress, a laundress, a cook, whatever honest work she could find to keep bread on our table and a roof over our heads. She taught me to read by candlelight, insisted I learn my letters and numbers when other girls of our station were already in service. She told me that knowledge was the one thing no one could ever take from me, and I believed her with the fierce faith of a child who knows her mother would never lie. But all those years of labor had taken their toll. The damp rooms, the endless hours bent over washing, the winters without adequate coal for the fire. By the time I secured my position at Ashford Manor, my mother's lungs had begun to betray her. The physician in the village called it consumption of a sort, though he admitted he could not be certain without proper examination, and proper examination cost money we did not have. I moved her to a small cottage on the outskirts of the Ashford estate, a crumbling structure that had once housed a groundskeeper before it was abandoned and forgotten. It was not much, but it had walls and a roof and a fireplace, and it was close enough that I could reach her on foot after my duties were complete. Every penny of my wages went to food, medicine, firewood. I ate the scraps from the kitchen when cook was not looking, and mended my own clothes until they were more patches than original fabric. I told no one. If the housekeeper discovered I was leaving the manor after dark, I would be dismissed without reference. If I lost this position, my mother would die alone and hungry, and the thought of that was more than I could bear. And so I became a creature of shadows, slipping out through the servants' entrance after the household had retired, crossing the frost-covered grounds with my heart pounding in my throat, carrying whatever food I had managed to save wrapped in cloth against my chest. I learned the patterns of the night watchman, the creaking boards to avoid, the dogs that would bark, and the ones that would only wag their tails in recognition. I learned to move without sound, without presence, without leaving any trace of my passage. What I did not learn, what I could not have anticipated, was that I was not the only restless soul wandering Ashford Manor in the dark hours. The Duke, I would later discover, had not slept properly in 5 years. He walked the halls of his ancestral home like a spectre, haunted by memories he could not escape and a future he could not imagine. He stood at windows, staring out at nothing. He sat in his study with books open on his lap that he never read. And sometimes, when the weight of his grief became too heavy, even for a man of his considerable strength, he wept in the darkness where no one could hear. I did not know any of this then. To me, the Duke was simply the master, a distant figure of authority, to be avoided whenever possible, a man whose very presence made the air feel thinner and my pulse quicken in ways I did not understand. I noticed things about him, of course. It was impossible not to. The way his dark hair had begun to show threads of silver at the temples, though he was only 32. The sharp angles of his jaw, the aristocratic nose, the eyes that were the color of a winter sky just before snow. The way his hands, when they were not clasped behind his back, seemed to search for something to hold. But I pushed these observations away as quickly as they arose. Such thoughts were dangerous for a girl in my position. Such thoughts led nowhere good. The night everything changed began like any other. I had finished my duties, scrubbing floors and polishing silver and changing linens until my back ached and my hands were raw. The house had settled into its nighttime quiet. The other servants retired to their quarters, the family presumably asleep in their grand bedchambers on the upper floors. I waited until the clock struck midnight, then gathered my small bundle of food and crept down the back stairs with practiced silence. The night was bitterly cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and makes each breath feel like swallowing ice. I pulled my thin cloak tighter around my shoulders and hurried across the grounds, my boots crunching softly on the frozen grass. The moon was full and bright, casting long shadows across the landscape and illuminating my path with silver light. I should have been more careful. I should have checked behind me, ensured I was alone. But I was tired, so tired, and my mind was fixed on my mother, on whether she had managed to keep the fire burning, on whether the medicine I had left that morning had eased her cough. I did not see him watching from the window. The cottage was dark when I arrived, which sent a spike of fear through my heart. My mother always kept a candle burning, a small beacon to guide me home through the darkness. I pushed open the door, my hands trembling with more than cold, and found her lying in bed, her face pale as paper, her breathing so shallow I had to lean close to detect it. "Mama," I whispered, dropping to my knees beside her. "Mama, I am here. I brought soup, chicken broth with vegetables. Cook made it fresh today. You must eat. You must keep your strength." She opened her eyes, and even in the darkness I could see how much they had dimmed since last I saw her. "My Eleanor," she breathed, and her voice was like dry leaves rustling in an autumn wind. "My sweet girl, you should not be here. You will be caught. You will lose your position." "I will not be caught," I assured her, though the words felt like lies in my mouth. "And even if I were, it would not matter. Nothing matters but you. Now please try to eat." I lit the candle with shaking fingers and set about warming the soup over the dying embers of the fire. The cottage was freezing, the walls doing little to keep out the winter chill. I added the last of the firewood and made a mental note to find more tomorrow, though I did not know where or how. My mother watched me move about the small space with eyes that saw too much, eyes that had always seen straight through to my heart. "You are exhausted," she said. "I can see it in your face. You cannot keep doing this, Eleanor. You will make yourself ill, and then what will become of either of us?" "I will be fine," I said, bringing the soup to her bedside and helping her sit up against the thin pillows. "I am young and strong. A little lost sleep will not harm me." But even as I spoke, I knew she was right. The strain was wearing on me in ways I could no longer hide. My hands trembled constantly. There were dark hollows beneath my eyes that no amount of cold water could erase. I had nearly fainted twice during my duties that week, catching myself against door frames and pretending I had merely stumbled. It could not continue. Something would have to give. I simply prayed that something would not be my mother's life or my position at the manor. I fed her slowly, coaxing each spoonful past her cracked lips, murmuring words of encouragement that felt increasingly hollow. She managed perhaps half the bowl before turning her face away, too weak to continue. I set the soup aside and took her hand in mine, feeling the bones beneath skin that had become papery and thin. "Tell me about the house," she said, her eyes drifting closed. "Tell me about the grand parties and the beautiful gowns. Tell me about the Duke." "There are no parties," I said softly. "The Duke does not entertain. He is in mourning still, though his wife has been gone 5 years. They say he loved her very much." 5 years, my mother repeated. "That is a long time to grieve. I suppose when you lose the person you love most in the world, you do not stop grieving simply because time has passed." My mother was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was barely audible. "Promise me something, Eleanor. Anything. Promise me you will not sacrifice your own happiness for mine. Promise me that when I am gone, you will live. Really live. You will find love and joy and all the things you deserve. You will not spend your life in shadows." Tears burned in my eyes, but I blinked them back. I refused to cry in front of her, refused to add the weight of my grief to her own burdens. "You are not going anywhere," I said firmly. "The spring will come, and the warm air will heal your lungs, and we will sit in the garden and watch the flowers bloom together." She smiled, a ghost of the radiant smile I remembered from my childhood. "My optimistic girl," she whispered. "You always did believe in happy endings." I stayed until the candle had burned low, and my mother had drifted into an uneasy sleep. Then I pressed a kiss to her forehead, tucked the blankets more tightly around her frail body, and slipped back out into the night. I did not see the figure standing in the shadow of the trees. I did not know that he had followed me from the manor, had watched through the window as I fed my mother soup with trembling hands, had heard the murmur of our voices, though not the words themselves. I did not know that the Duke of Ashford stood in the freezing darkness with tears streaming down his face, his heart cracking open for the first time in 5 years, watching a servant girl show more love and devotion in a single night than he had witnessed in all the ballrooms and drawing rooms of English society. I knew none of this. I simply walked back to the manor with my head bowed and my heart heavy, climbed the servants' stairs to my small room under the eaves, and fell into my narrow bed without even removing my boots. I dreamed of my mother as she had been when I was young, laughing and dancing and full of life. I dreamed of warm spring days and gardens full of flowers. And then, just before waking, I dreamed of winter eyes and strong hands reaching toward me through the darkness, and I woke with my cheeks wet with tears I did not remember shedding. The next morning, everything was different, though I did not understand why at first. I went about my duties as usual, scrubbing and polishing and keeping my eyes cast down. But I could not shake the sensation of being watched, of someone's gaze following me through the halls. Twice I turned quickly, certain I would find someone standing behind me, and twice I found only empty air. It was Mrs. Blackwood who first made me aware that something had shifted. The housekeeper was a tall, angular woman with iron-gray hair and a disposition to match. She had disliked me from the moment I arrived at Ashford Manor, though I had never been able to determine why. Perhaps she sensed the secrets I carried. Perhaps she simply despised anyone who failed to cower sufficiently in her presence. Whatever the reason, she took every opportunity to assign me the most difficult tasks, to criticize my work, to remind me of my place in the household hierarchy. That morning, she stopped me in the corridor outside the kitchens, her thin lips pressed into their customary line of disapproval. "The Duke has asked that your duties be reduced," she said, and there was something in her voice I had never heard before. Something that might have been suspicion, or might have been fear. "You are no longer to scrub floors or clean the fireplaces. You will focus on light dusting and attending to the guest chambers." I stared at her, certain I had misheard. "I beg your pardon, ma'am. You heard me perfectly well." Her eyes narrowed. "I do not know what game you are playing, girl, or what lies you have told to attract the master's attention. But I will be watching you. One misstep, one hint of impropriety, and you will find yourself on the streets where you belong." She swept away before I could respond, leaving me standing in the corridor with my heart pounding and my mind racing. The Duke had noticed me. The Duke had intervened on my behalf. But why? What possible reason could he have for concerning himself with the workload of a chambermaid? I told myself it meant nothing. Perhaps one of the other servants had complained that I appeared unwell. Perhaps the Duke was simply in a generous mood, if such a thing were possible for a man who seemed constitutionally incapable of warmth. I pushed the questions aside and focused on my work, grateful for the lighter tasks, even as I remained vigilant for any sign of Mrs. Blackwood's promised surveillance. That evening, something even stranger occurred. When I went to the kitchens to collect my meager supper, Cook pressed a cloth bundle into my hands, along with my usual portion of bread and cheese. "Extra from dinner tonight," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Seems a shame to let it go to waste." I opened the bundle to find a generous portion of roast chicken, still warm, along with potatoes and carrots and a small pot of gravy. It was more food than I had seen in months, more than I could possibly eat myself. My hands trembled as I clutched it to my chest. "Thank you," I whispered, but Cook had already turned away, busying herself with dishes that did not need washing. I did not question my good fortune. I could not afford to question it. That night, I smuggled the food to my mother's cottage and watched her eat more than she had managed in weeks. Color returned to her cheeks. Her breathing seemed easier. She even laughed, a weak and raspy sound that was nonetheless the most beautiful thing I had ever heard. "Eleanor," she said, looking at me with wonder, "where did you get all this?" "The kitchen had extra," I said, which was not entirely a lie. "I think God is finally smiling on us, Mama." "Or perhaps," she said softly, "someone else is." I did not understand her words then. I would understand them all too well soon enough. The days that followed brought more small miracles. Food kept appearing in the kitchens, always with reasonable explanations that somehow never quite rang true. My duties remained light, despite Mrs. Blackwood's obvious displeasure. And then, on the fourth day, a physician arrived at my mother's cottage. I was not there when he came. I learned of it that evening when I arrived to find my mother sitting up in bed with more color in her face than I had seen in months. "A doctor came," she told me, her eyes bright with tears. "He said he had been sent by a benefactor who wished to remain anonymous. He examined me, left medicines and instructions, promised to return next week. Eleanor, he believes I can recover. He believes with proper care and rest and nutrition, my lungs can heal." I fell to my knees beside her bed and wept. Great, heaving sobs that shook my entire body, releasing all the fear and desperation I had been holding inside for so long. My mother stroked my hair with hands that felt stronger than they had in months, murmuring comfort and love into the darkness of the cottage. "Someone is watching over us," she said. "Someone with a kind heart and generous spirit." I lifted my head, wiping my eyes with the back of my hand. "Who?" I asked. "Who would do such a thing?" My mother's smile was knowing, almost mysterious. "I have my suspicions," she said, "but perhaps some gifts are better left unexamined." I wanted to argue, to demand answers, but exhaustion claimed me before I could form the words. I fell asleep that night curled on the floor beside my mother's bed, and for the first time in longer than I could remember, my dreams were peaceful, The mystery of our benefactor consumed my thoughts in the days that followed. I examined every interaction, every glance, every word spoken in my presence, searching for some clue to the identity of this anonymous savior. But there was nothing. The household continued on as it always had, the servants going about their duties, the Duke a distant presence rarely glimpsed. Except I began to notice things I had never noticed before. The way my path seemed to cross with the Duke's more often than chance would allow. The way his gaze lingered on me when he thought I was not looking. The way he would sometimes pause in a doorway, as if he wanted to speak, but could not find the words. One afternoon, perhaps a week after the physician's first visit, I was dusting the books in the library when the Duke entered. I had not expected him. The library was supposed to be empty at this hour, and I had counted on the solitude to work through my tangled thoughts. When I heard the door open, I whirled around, my heart leaping into my throat, and found myself face to face with Sebastian Ashford for the first time since my employment began. He was taller than I remembered, or perhaps I had simply never allowed myself to look properly. His shoulders were broad beneath his impeccably tailored coat, his posture that of a man accustomed to commanding attention without demanding it. But it was his eyes that caught me, held me, made it impossible to look away. They were not cold, as I had always believed. They were sad, devastatingly, achingly sad, with depths of pain that made my own sorrows feel small by comparison. "Forgive me," I stammered, dropping into a curtsy and fixing my gaze on the floor. "I did not realize you would be requiring the library, Your Grace. I will leave immediately. Stay." The word was soft, almost tentative, utterly unlike the commanding tone I would have expected from a duke. I remained frozen in my curtsy, uncertain whether I had heard correctly. "Please," he added, and there was something in his voice that made my chest tighten. "I would not wish to interrupt your work." I straightened slowly, still not daring to meet his eyes. "My work can wait, Your Grace. The library is yours, as is everything else in this house," he said, and I thought I detected a note of bitterness in his tone. Yet I find myself a stranger in my own home, surrounded by people who scatter like frightened birds whenever I appear. He moved to the window, his back to me, and stared out at the gray winter sky. I should have left then. Protocol demanded it. A servant did not remain in a room alone with her master, did not engage in conversation that was not strictly necessary. But something held me in place, some invisible thread connecting his sadness to my own. "They do not scatter from fear, Your Grace," I heard myself say. "They scatter from respect, and perhaps from uncertainty about how to offer comfort to a man who seems determined to refuse it." He turned sharply, and I realized with horror what I had done. I had spoken to the Duke as an equal, had offered an opinion where none was asked, had violated every rule of my station. I braced myself for anger, for dismissal, for the cold fury that surely awaited such impertinence. Instead, he laughed. It was a rusty sound, as if his voice had forgotten how laughter worked, but it was unmistakably genuine. "You are very direct for a chambermaid," he said, and there was something almost like warmth in his winter eyes. "Forgive me, Your Grace," I spoke out of turn. "I will take my leave now." I moved toward the door, my cheeks burning with shame, but his voice stopped me before I could escape. "What is your name?" "Eleanor, Your Grace. Eleanor Whitmore." "Eleanor," he repeated, and my name in his mouth sounded like a question and an answer all at once. "How long have you been in my service, Eleanor?" 2 years, Your Grace." 2 years. He shook his head slowly. "And in all that time, I do not believe we have ever spoken. It is not customary for servants to speak with their masters, Your Grace, unless spoken to. And yet you spoke to me just now. Quite eloquently, if I may say. I did not know how to respond to that, so I remained silent, my eyes fixed on a spot somewhere past his left shoulder. "Tell me, Eleanor Whitmore," he said, moving closer. His voice had dropped, become almost intimate, and I felt my heart begin to race in a way that had nothing to do with fear. What do you think of when you dust these books? What thoughts occupy that busy mind of yours? I think of my duties, Your Grace. I think of performing them well. I do not believe that is entirely true. He was closer now, close enough that I could smell the sandalwood of his cologne, see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, feel the warmth radiating from his body. I took a step backward, my hip connecting with the edge of a reading table. "What do you want from me?" I asked, and my voice came out as barely more than a whisper. He was silent for a long moment, studying my face with an intensity that made me feel utterly exposed. Then he stepped back, and the tension between us shifted into something that felt almost like loss. "Nothing," he said quietly. "I want nothing from you that you are not willing to give. Please return to your work, and forgive me for disturbing you." He left the library without looking back, and I stood among the dusty books with my heart pounding and my mind in chaos, trying to understand what had just happened and why I felt as if my entire world had tilted on its axis. That night, when I visited my mother, I told her about the encounter in the library. She listened without interrupting, her eyes never leaving my face, and when I finished, she was quiet for a long time. "Do you know who your benefactor is now?" she finally asked. I shook my head, though even as I did, pieces were beginning to fall into place. The reduced duties, the extra food, the physician, the way the Duke looked at me as if he were searching for something he had lost. "I think you do know," my mother said gently. "I think you have known for days, but have been afraid to admit it." "It is impossible," I whispered. "A duke does not concern himself with the troubles of a chambermaid. A duke does not send physicians to care for servants' sick mothers." "A man might," my mother replied, "regardless of his title. And what would such a man want in return? Perhaps nothing more than what he has already received. The chance to do something good. The chance to feel something other than grief." I thought of Sebastian Ashford standing at the library window, his voice cracked with loneliness, his eyes full of a sorrow that mirrored my own. I thought of the rusty laugh that seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised me. I thought of the way he had stepped back when I asked what he wanted, as if my question had wounded him. "I cannot love him," I said, though my mother had not asked. "Even if he were the one, even if he has been my secret benefactor this whole time, I cannot allow myself to feel anything for him. The gap between us is too wide. Society would never permit it. I would be ruined and he would be disgraced, and in the end, we would both be destroyed." My mother took my hand in hers, her grip surprisingly strong. "Eleanor," she said, "listen to me carefully. I have spent my entire life being practical, being cautious, doing what was expected and never reaching for anything more. And where has it gotten me? A cold cottage, a failing body, a daughter who works herself to exhaustion to keep me alive. I do not regret the choices I made because they gave me you, and you are the greatest joy of my existence. But I do not want that life for you. I want you to reach. I want you to hope. I want you to believe that you deserve more than shadows and survival." "It is not about what I deserve," I said. "It is about what is possible." She smiled, and for a moment I saw the young woman she had once been, full of dreams and determination. "Everything is impossible," she said, "until it is not." I did not sleep that night. I lay in my narrow bed under the eaves and stared at the ceiling, turning my mother's words over in my mind. She was wrong, of course. Hope was a luxury I could not afford. But even as I repeated this to myself like a prayer, some treacherous part of my heart whispered that maybe, just maybe, she was right. The next few weeks brought changes I could not have anticipated. My duties shifted again, this time to tasks that brought me into closer proximity with the Duke. I was assigned to dust his study, to bring his afternoon tea, to tend the fire in the library where he spent his evenings reading. Mrs. Blackwood watched these developments with barely concealed fury. her suspicions crystallizing into certainty that something improper was occurring. But there was nothing she could point to, no evidence of wrongdoing. The Duke treated me with unfailing politeness. I maintained perfect decorum. If there were undercurrents beneath our careful interactions, they remained invisible to everyone but the two of us. And yet I could not deny that something was building between us. Something as inevitable as the tide. Our conversations grew longer, more personal. He asked about my childhood, my education, my dreams for the future. I found myself telling him things I had never told anyone, secrets I had kept locked away for years. And in return, he shared his own pain, his own guilt, the weight of grief he carried like chains around his heart. I learned about Charlotte, his late wife. He had loved her, yes, but theirs had been an arranged marriage, affection born of duty rather than passion. She had been kind, proper, everything a duchess should be. But there had been a distance between them he could never bridge, a fundamental loneliness that neither could quite overcome. When she died, he had mourned not just the loss of his wife, but the loss of the life they might have built, the children they might have raised, the love they might have found, if only they had been given more time. She deserved better, he told me one evening as we sat in the library, the fire crackling between us. She deserved someone who loved her completely, without reservation. I tried. God knows I tried, but I never quite managed it. You were young, I said softly. Marriages of arrangement are rarely love matches. That does not make you a villain. Does it not? He asked, and his eyes were haunted. She died trying to give me an heir, Eleanor. She died in pain and fear, and I could do nothing to save her. I could not even give her the comfort of knowing her child would survive. What kind of man fails so utterly in his most basic duty? A human man, I replied. A man who carries more guilt than he deserves. He looked at me then, with something in his gaze that made my breath catch. You speak to me as no one else does, he said. You do not flatter or fawn or tell me what you think I wish to hear. You speak truth, even when it is uncomfortable. Why? Because I believe you have had enough lies to last a lifetime, Your Grace, and because I believe that somewhere beneath the grief and the guilt there is a man worth knowing, a man who sends physicians to sick women he has never met, who lightens the burdens of overworked servants, who stands in frozen gardens at midnight weeping for a chambermaid's devotion to her mother. His face went still. You know, I suspected. You have just confirmed it. He rose from his chair and moved to the window, his back rigid with tension. I should not have followed you that night, he said. It was an invasion of your privacy, a violation of the trust between master and servant. I have no excuse except that I was curious and lonely, and you are the first person in this house who has seemed fully alive to me in 5 years. I joined him at the window, standing close enough to feel the warmth of his body, but not quite touching. Why did you weep? I asked. He was silent for a long moment. Then, in a voice thick with emotion, he said, Because I saw something beautiful. Because I saw a young woman giving everything she had for someone she loved, asking nothing in return, expecting nothing. Because I saw real devotion, real sacrifice, and I realized I had never witnessed anything like it before. Not in all the grand houses I have visited, not in all the society balls I have attended, not in all the marriages I have observed. I saw you, Eleanor, and something in me broke open. Tears were streaming down my face, though I could not have said when they started. I did not know you were watching, I whispered. I know. That is precisely the point. You were not performing. You were simply being who you are. And who you are is extraordinary. I am a chambermaid, I said. I am nobody. He turned to face me, and in his eyes I saw something that terrified me more than anything I had ever encountered. I saw hope. You are not nobody, he said. You are Eleanor Whitmore, and you are the first person in 5 years who has made me want to wake up in the morning. Your Grace, I began. but he shook his head. Sebastian, when we are alone, when it is just the two of us, please call me Sebastian. I cannot. Why? Because if I call you by your name, I will forget the chasm between us. I will forget that you are a duke and I am a servant. I will forget that this, whatever this is, can only end in disaster. Or perhaps, he said softly, it could end in something else entirely. He did not touch me. He did not need to. The air between us was charged with possibility, with danger, with a longing so intense I could feel it in my bones. I should go, I whispered. Yes, he agreed. You should. But neither of us moved. The fire crackled. The clock on the mantel ticked away the seconds, and somewhere in the darkness outside, snow began to fall, blanketing the world in white. I do not know how long we stood there, suspended in that moment of impossible connection. Eventually, I found the strength to step back, to break whatever spell had woven itself around us. "Good night, Your Grace," I said, and my voice was steadier than I had any right to expect. "Good night, Eleanor." I walked to the door on legs that trembled, and just as I reached for the handle, his voice came again. "Your mother, is she improving?" I turned to find him watching me with an expression I could not read. "She is," I said. "Thanks to you." "Thanks to you," he corrected. "You are the one who cares for her, who loves her. I merely provided resources. The rest, the important part, that has all been you." I did not trust myself to respond. I simply nodded and fled the room, my heart pounding so loudly I was certain it would wake the entire household. That night, I lay in bed and allowed myself to feel everything I had been suppressing. The attraction, the longing, the impossible hope that maybe, somehow, there was a path forward that did not lead to destruction. I thought of my mother's words about reaching, about believing I deserved more than shadows and survival. I thought of Sebastian standing at the window with snow falling behind him, his eyes full of something that looked terrifyingly like love. And for the first time in my life, I allowed myself to want. The weeks that followed were a kind of exquisite torture. Sebastian and I continued our conversations in the library, our connection deepening with each passing day. He told me about his childhood, his domineering father, the expectations that had shaped his entire existence. I told him about my mother's struggles, my father's abandonment, the fear that had been my constant companion for as long as I could remember. We spoke of books and music and philosophy, of dreams and regrets and the nature of love. We spoke of everything except the one thing that hung between us, the question neither of us dared to ask. During the day, I maintained the fiction of servant and master. I curtsied when he passed in the hallways, addressed him as Your Grace in front of others, kept my eyes demurely lowered whenever we were not alone. But in those stolen hours in the library, with the door closed and the fire burning low, we were simply Eleanor and Sebastian, two souls who had found each other against all odds. My mother continued to improve under the physician's care. The color returned fully to her cheeks, and her cough diminished until it was nothing more than an occasional nuisance. She began to walk again, short distances at first, then longer as her strength returned. And through it all, she watched me with knowing eyes, asked questions I was not prepared to answer, and offered advice I was not sure I could take. "He loves you," she said one evening, as I sat beside her bed, brushing her hair as I had when I was a child. "The Duke. I have never met him, but I can see it in your face whenever you speak of him. And I suspect if I could see his face, I would see the same thing there." "It does not matter what he feels," I said. "Nothing can come of it." "Why not?" "Because the world will not allow it. Because society has rules, and those rules exist for reasons. Because even if he wanted to be with me, he would be destroyed. His reputation, his standing, everything he has built. I cannot be responsible for that." My mother was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "When your father left us, I was devastated, not because I loved him. I had stopped loving him long before, but because I had believed so completely in the world's rules. I had done everything right. I had been a good wife, a good mother, a good woman, and none of it mattered. The world failed me anyway. Mama, let me finish. After he left, I had a choice. I could continue to follow the rules, to place my faith in a system that had already proven itself unworthy of that faith. Or I could make my own rules, build my own life, decide for myself what mattered and what did not. She turned to look at me, her eyes fierce with conviction. I chose the latter, Eleanor, and that choice gave me you. It gave me a daughter who is braver and stronger and more extraordinary than I could ever have imagined. A daughter who deserves every happiness this world has to offer. But the cost, I whispered. There is always a cost. The question is whether what you gain is worth what you pay. I did not have an answer for her. I did not have an answer for myself. The crisis came as crises always do, without warning and without mercy. Mrs. Blackwood had been watching me for weeks, her suspicion hardening into certainty that something improper was occurring between myself and the Duke. She had searched my room, questioned the other servants, followed me through the house at odd hours, hoping to catch me in some compromising situation. When all of that failed to produce the evidence she needed, she resorted to more drastic measures. It was a Tuesday afternoon when she burst into the servants' hall and announced in ringing tones that I was a thief and a harlot and would be brought before the Duke immediately to face justice. I was in the kitchens at the time, helping cook prepare the evening meal. The accusation hit me like a physical blow, driving all the air from my lungs. I had stolen nothing. I had done nothing improper. But Mrs. Blackwood's face was triumphant. Her thin lips curved in a smile of pure malice, and I knew with sickening certainty that she had found something, manufactured something, arranged some piece of damning evidence that would destroy me. "I saw you," she hissed as the other servants gathered around, their faces a mix of shock and morbid curiosity. "I saw you leaving the manor after dark. I saw you stealing food from the kitchens. I saw you sneaking into the Duke's study when he was not there. You are a thief and a seducer, and you will pay for your crimes." "I am neither of those things," I said, but my voice was shaking, and I knew no one would believe me. "We shall let the Duke decide, Mrs. Blackwood said. "Bring her to the great hall. I have already sent for his grace." I was marched through the corridors like a criminal, 2 footmen flanking me as if I might try to flee. My mind raced through possibilities, explanations, defenses. Yes, I had left the manor after dark. Yes, I had taken food from the kitchens. But I had taken nothing that was not already designated as waste, and I had broken curfew only to care for my dying mother. These were not crimes. They were acts of desperation, of love, of a daughter doing everything in her power to save the woman who had given her life. But as we entered the great hall, and I saw Sebastian standing there, his face pale and his eyes unreadable, I realized that none of my explanations would matter. Mrs. Blackwood had crafted this moment too carefully. She had assembled the entire household as witnesses. She had chosen her accusations to maximize scandal and minimize defense. Whatever I said, however I tried to explain, the damage was already done. "Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwood began, her voice dripping with false sorrow, "it grieves me deeply to bring this matter to your attention. But as housekeeper of this estate, I have a duty to protect its honor and integrity. This girl, this Eleanor Whitmore, whom you so generously elevated above her station, has betrayed your trust in the most grievous manner possible." Sebastian's eyes found mine across the room, and in them I saw a storm of emotions, anger and fear, and something that might have been guilt. "What evidence do you have of these accusations?" he asked, and his voice was the cold, commanding tone of a duke, utterly unlike the gentle warmth I had come to know. Mrs. Blackwood produced a bundle wrapped in cloth, the same cloth I used to carry food to my mother's cottage. Inside were scraps of food, clearly taken from the kitchens. "This was found in her room," she announced, "hidden beneath her mattress. And this," she held up a small silver snuff box that I had never seen before, "was discovered in her apron pocket this morning. It belongs to the late Duchess, may she rest in peace. A treasured keepsake that this creature thought to steal and sell for her own profit." "That is not mine," I said, my voice rising with desperation. "I have never seen that snuff box before. It was planted." "A likely story," Mrs. Blackwood sneered. "And the food. Will you deny that as well? The food was scraps designated for waste. I took nothing that would have been used, so you admit to theft. I admit to taking food that would have been thrown away. Food that I used to keep my mother alive while she recovered from an illness that nearly killed her." A murmur rippled through the assembled servants. I saw faces that had been hostile begin to soften, saw doubt creep into expressions that had been certain of my guilt. But Mrs. Blackwood was not finished. "And the late-night excursions," she pressed. "Do you admit to leaving the manor after curfew, violating the rules of this household, sneaking about in the darkness like a common criminal?" "I left to care for my mother. She was dying. I had no other choice." "There are always choices," Mrs. Blackwood said. "You chose to deceive your employers. You chose to break the rules that every other servant in this household obeys. You chose to place your own interests above the honor of this estate, and now you will face the consequences." She turned to Sebastian, her face a mask of righteous indignation. "I recommend immediate dismissal, Your Grace, without reference. Let this be a lesson to any other servant who might consider betraying your trust." The hall fell silent. Every eye turned to the Duke, waiting for his judgment. I stood with my head bowed and my heart breaking, knowing that whatever he decided, I had already lost. If he dismissed me, I would be ruined, unable to find another position, forced to throw myself on the uncertain mercy of the parish. If he defended me, the scandal would be immense, and Mrs. Blackwood would have the ammunition she needed to spread rumors that would destroy us both. I waited for the blow to fall. Instead, Sebastian began to speak, and his words shattered everything I thought I knew. "I followed Eleanor Whitmore on the night in question," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the silent hall. "I watched from the darkness as she entered a cottage on the outskirts of my estate. I observed her through the window as she fed soup to a woman who was clearly gravely ill. I heard her singing lullabies, saw her weeping, witnessed devotion so pure and selfless that it brought me to tears." The assembled servants stared at him in shock. Mrs. Blackwood's face had gone the color of old cheese. "I did not reveal myself," Sebastian continued. I should have made my presence known and offered assistance openly. Instead, I chose to help from the shadows. I sent a physician to care for Eleanor's mother. I arranged for additional food to be made available in the kitchens. I reduced Eleanor's duties so that she would have strength enough to continue her nightly vigils. Every kindness she has received in these past weeks has come from me, and I offer no apology for any of it." "Your Grace," Mrs. Blackwood stammered, "this is highly irregular." "What is irregular?" Sebastian said, his voice hardening to steel. "Is your behavior, Mrs. Blackwood. You have manufactured evidence against an innocent woman. You have planted stolen items among her possessions. You have sought to destroy a life out of petty jealousy and spite. Did you think I would not investigate? Did you think I would simply accept your accusations without question? I do not know what you mean, Your Grace." "The snuff box," Sebastian said. "It has been in my possession for the past 3 years, locked in a drawer in my study. I placed it there myself after Charlotte's death. The only way it could have appeared in Eleanor's pocket is if someone removed it from that drawer and planted it there. Someone with access to my private chambers, someone like you." Mrs. Blackwood's face crumpled. "Your Grace, I was only trying to protect you. This girl is beneath you. She is nobody, nothing. She will bring shame upon this house." "The only shame I see," Sebastian said quietly, "is yours." He turned to the assembled servants, his expression grave. "Mrs. Blackwood's employment is terminated, effective immediately. She will be escorted from the premises within the hour. If I discover that any of you have participated in her schemes or spread malicious gossip about Eleanor Whitmore, you will join her." No one spoke. No one moved. Mrs. Blackwood stood frozen, her face a mask of disbelief and rage. "One more thing," Sebastian said, and his voice softened as he looked at me for the first time since his speech began. "Eleanor, I owe you an apology. I should have spoken sooner. I should have claimed responsibility for my actions instead of hiding behind anonymity. I have caused you pain and fear that you did not deserve, and I am deeply sorry." "Your Grace," I whispered. But he shook his head. "Sebastian," he said, "when we are alone or before the world, I would like you to call me Sebastian." The gasps that greeted this statement were audible throughout the hall. But Sebastian did not seem to hear them. His eyes remained fixed on my face, waiting for my response. I did not know what to say. I did not know what to do. Everything was happening too fast, too publicly, too impossibly. And yet, standing there in the great hall with the entire household watching, I felt something shift inside me. The fear that had been my constant companion began to loosen its grip. The barriers I had built around my heart began to crumble. "Sebastian," I said, and his name tasted like freedom on my tongue. He smiled then, the first real smile I had ever seen on his face. It transformed him entirely, chasing away the shadows and revealing the man beneath. "Eleanor," he said, "I have something important to ask you. But first, I believe we should clear the room." The servants scattered like leaves before a wind, dragging the shell-shocked Mrs. Blackwood with them. Within moments, Sebastian and I were alone in the vast hall, the silence pressing around us like a physical presence. "I am sorry," he said again, moving closer. "I handled this badly. I should have spoken to you privately before making such a public display. But when I saw Mrs. Blackwood's accusations, when I realized she meant to destroy you, I could not stay silent. You saved me," I said. "Again. I saved myself as much as you. These past weeks, Eleanor, have been the closest thing to happiness I have known in 5 years. The thought of losing you, of watching you be cast out because of my cowardice, was unbearable." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends on you." He took my hands in his, and his touch was warm and strong and impossibly gentle. "I know the world will not make this easy. I know there will be scandal and gossip and condemnation. But I find that I care very little for the world's opinion anymore. The only opinion that matters to me is yours. Sebastian, I cannot be your mistress. I will not. I am not asking you to be my mistress," he said. "I am asking you to be my wife." The word hung in the air between us, impossible and intoxicating. "That cannot be," I whispered. "Dukes do not marry chambermaid." "This duke does," he said. "This duke will marry whoever he pleases, and what pleases him is you. Your courage, your devotion, your honesty, your heart. I want all of it, Eleanor, for the rest of my life. Your family will disown you. I have no family left. My parents are dead. My wife is dead. My child never drew breath. You and your mother are more family to me than anyone I share blood with. Society will shun you. Then we will build our own society, one based on love rather than lineage." I was crying again, tears streaming down my face in an endless river. "You hardly know me," I said. "I know enough. I know that you would walk through fire for the people you love. I know that you face each day with courage, even when you are terrified. I know that you have been alone for far too long, carrying burdens no one should have to carry by themselves. And I know that I want to spend the rest of my life ensuring you never have to be alone again." He released one of my hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a ring that sparkled in the afternoon light. It was a simple band, gold with a single sapphire that seemed to glow with inner fire. "This was my grandmother's," he said. "She was a formidable woman who scandalized society by marrying a man beneath her station. They loved each other until the day they died. I would be honored if you would wear it." I stared at the ring, then at his face, then at the ring again. "This is madness," I said. "The best things usually are. Your household will revolt. Then I will hire a new household. The ton will never accept me. The ton can go to the devil." A laugh escaped me, surprising us both. It bubbled up from somewhere deep inside, carrying with it all the fear and tension and impossible hope that had been building for weeks. Sebastian laughed too, and the sound filled the great hall, echoing off the ancient walls and transforming the cold, formal space into something almost warm. "Is that a yes?" he asked. I looked at him, this complicated, grieving, generous man who had seen me at my most desperate and loved me anyway. I thought of my mother's words about reaching, about believing I deserved more than shadows. I thought of all the rules I had followed my entire life, all the barriers I had accepted as immutable, all the dreams I had dismissed as impossible. And then I thought of spending the rest of my life by his side, waking up to his face each morning, building something new and beautiful from the wreckage of our separate sorrows. "Yes," I said. "Yes, it is." He slid the ring onto my finger, and it fit as if it had been made for me. Then he pulled me into his arms and held me close, his heart beating against mine, his breath warm on my hair. "I should warn you," he murmured. "I am not an easy man to love. I am stubborn and brooding and prone to long silences. I have been accused of being cold, though I suspect that was simply grief masquerading as indifference. There will be days when I am difficult to reach, days when the weight of the past threatens to pull me under." "I am not easy either," I replied. "I am proud and independent and unaccustomed to accepting help. I have spent so long taking care of others that I have forgotten how to let anyone take care of me. And I come with a mother who, I should warn you, is even more stubborn than I am." He laughed again, that wonderful rusty sound that seemed to get smoother every time I heard it. "I look forward to meeting her properly," he said. "I suspect we will get along famously." "She already approves of you," I said. "She told me weeks ago that you loved me. Your mother is a wise woman. She is. She is also going to be insufferably smug about being right. A small price to pay." We stood there for a long time, holding each other in the fading afternoon light. Outside, I could hear the sounds of the household returning to normal, the bustle and chatter of servants going about their duties. Inside, everything had changed. "When do we tell them?" I asked. "Tomorrow," Sebastian said. "Tonight, I want you to myself. Tonight, we celebrate. Tomorrow we begin the work of building our new life. And the scandal." He shrugged, a gesture so casual and un-Duke-like that I had to smile. "Let them talk. Let them whisper and gossip and clutch their pearls in horror. In 6 months, there will be a new scandal to occupy their attention. In a year, we will be old news. And in 10 years, when we are still deliriously happy and they are all trapped in their loveless society marriages, they will wonder how we knew something they never learned." "And what is that?" I asked. "That love is worth more than approval, that happiness is worth more than propriety, that a life lived fully is worth all the risks it requires." I reached up and touched his face, tracing the lines of his jaw, the curve of his cheek, the worry lines at the corners of his eyes. "You really believe that?" I said. "I did not," he admitted. "Not until you. But watching you these past weeks, seeing the lengths you would go to for the people you love, has taught me more about courage than a lifetime of privilege ever could. You showed me what really matters, Eleanor. You showed me that love is not a weakness to be guarded against, but a strength to be embraced." I kissed him then, standing in the great hall of Ashford Manor, the future Duchess in the arms of the Duke. It was a kiss that tasted of tears and hope and promise, of endings and beginnings, of all the impossible things that had somehow become possible. When we finally separated, both of us breathing hard, Sebastian smiled down at me with such tenderness that my heart ached. "Come," he said. "Let us go tell your mother that she was right." The walk to my mother's cottage felt different than all the times I had made it before. I was not sneaking now, not hiding, not carrying fear like a weight around my neck. Sebastian walked beside me, his hand warm in mine, and the winter night seemed almost gentle, the cold air fresh rather than biting. My mother was sitting up when we arrived, reading by candlelight, stronger than she had been in months. She looked up as we entered, and her eyes went immediately to our joined hands, then to the ring on my finger, then to my face. "Well," she said, with a smile that held no surprise whatsoever, "it is about time." Sebastian laughed and released my hand to take hers instead, bowing over it with courtly grace. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I am Sebastian Ashford. I have come to ask your blessing to marry your daughter." "You have already asked her," my mother pointed out. "True, but I find I value your good opinion as well. You raised an extraordinary woman. I would not wish to begin our new life together with any resentment between us." My mother studied him for a long moment, her eyes sharp despite her weakened state. "You know the world will try to destroy this," she said. "The aristocracy does not take kindly to interlopers. They will make Eleanor's life difficult. They will make yours difficult too." "I know," Sebastian said. "I do not care. And when you have children, will you care then? When society turns its back on your sons and daughters because their mother was a chambermaid, then society will be the poorer for it. My children will be raised to value character over rank, love over propriety, kindness over cruelty. They will inherit my title and my estates, yes, but more importantly, they will inherit their mother's courage and their grandmother's wisdom. I consider that a fine legacy." My mother's face softened. She looked at me, then back at Sebastian, then at me again. "He will do," she said finally, "but he talks too much." I burst out laughing, and Sebastian joined me, and even my mother's lips twitched with suppressed amusement. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of conversation and planning and quiet celebration. Sebastian produced a bottle of wine from somewhere, and we toasted to the future, to health, to love, to all the impossible things that had brought us to this moment. My mother told stories of my childhood, embarrassing tales that made me blush and made Sebastian laugh. Sebastian told stories of his own youth, revealing a mischievous streak I had not suspected. And I sat between them, the two people I loved most in the world, feeling for the first time in my life that I had found my place. When the hour grew late and my mother's eyes began to droop with fatigue, Sebastian rose and offered me his hand. "We should let her rest," he said, "and we should return to the manor before anyone begins to wonder where we have gone." "They already know," I pointed out. "After your speech in the great hall, there is not a soul in that house who does not know exactly what is happening. True, but we should maintain at least a pretense of propriety until the announcement is made. It will make the transition easier for the staff." "Always thinking of others," my mother murmured, her eyes already half closed. I knew I liked him. I kissed her forehead and promised to return in the morning. Then Sebastian and I walked back through the darkness, hand in hand, toward the glowing windows of Ashford Manor and the new life that awaited us there. The announcement came the next day, and the reaction was everything we had anticipated and more. The servants were divided between shock, skepticism, and in a few cases, genuine joy. The local gentry, when word inevitably spread, ranged from scandalized to scornful to grudgingly impressed. Letters arrived from London, from Sebastian's distant relatives and social acquaintances, varying in tone from icily polite to openly hostile. A few congratulated him. More warned him of the consequences of his choice. One or two threatened to cut ties entirely. Sebastian read them all, responded to none, and threw the worst of them into the fire with evident satisfaction. For my part, I found the adjustment more difficult than I had anticipated. I was no longer a servant, but I did not yet feel like a lady. I moved through the halls of Ashford Manor like a ghost, uncertain of my place, unsure how to interact with the people who had so recently been my fellow workers. Some of them resented me, and I could not blame them. Others seemed genuinely pleased by my elevation. Most fell somewhere in between, treating me with the careful politeness one reserves for unpredictable animals. Sebastian noticed my discomfort, of course. He noticed everything. One evening, perhaps a week after our engagement, he found me sitting alone in the library, staring at the fire with unseeing eyes. "Tell me," he said, settling into the chair beside mine. "It is nothing." "Eleanor." He reached over and took my hand. We agreed to be honest with each other, remember? No more hiding, no more pretending everything is fine when it is not. I sighed. I feel like I do not belong anywhere. I am not a servant anymore, but I am not a lady either. I do not know how to talk to these people, how to dress, how to behave. I spent my whole life learning one set of rules, and now all those rules are useless. "They are not useless," Sebastian said. "They taught you compassion and hard work and humility. Those qualities will serve you far better as a duchess than any knowledge of etiquette or fashion. But society will not see it that way. They will see a chambermaid playing dress-up, pretending to be something she is not. Then society is blind. And since when do we care what society thinks?" I laughed despite myself. "I am beginning to think you are a revolutionary at heart, Your Grace." "Perhaps I am." His eyes sparkled with mischief. "Perhaps that is why I fell in love with you. You reminded me that the old rules are not sacred, that we can build something new if we are brave enough to try." I looked down at our joined hands, his strong and aristocratic, mine still bearing the calluses of a lifetime of work. "We are very different," I said. "Yes, and that is precisely why we complement each other so well." He lifted my hand to his lips and kissed it, a gesture so tender that tears sprang to my eyes. "I have an idea," he said, "about the household, about helping you find your place. I am listening. I would like you to take over the management of the staff. Not as housekeeper, that would be insulting to your position. But as mistress of the house, you know these people. You understand their work, their struggles, their needs. Who better to lead them than someone who has walked in their shoes? They will resent me. Some will, at first. But you have a gift for seeing people, Eleanor, for understanding them. Use that gift. Show them that you have not forgotten where you came from, that you value their contributions, that you will fight for their welfare. They will come around, and if they do not, then we will hire new staff. But I do not think it will come to that. I think you underestimate your own capacity to inspire loyalty." I considered his words. It was a risk, certainly. But when had I ever been afraid of risk? "Very well," I said. "I will try." His smile was radiant. "That is all I ask." The winter months passed in a whirlwind of preparation and adjustment. I threw myself into my new role with determination, meeting with each member of the staff individually, learning their names and histories and concerns. I made changes where changes were needed, improving conditions for the lower servants, ensuring fair wages and reasonable hours, creating systems that would prevent anyone from being worked to exhaustion as I had been. I encountered resistance, of course. Some of the older staff, particularly those who had been loyal to Mrs. Blackwood, refused to accept my authority. But slowly, gradually, the tide began to turn. People saw that I was sincere, that I truly cared about their welfare. They began to trust me, and as their trust grew, so did my confidence. My mother moved into Ashford Manor at Sebastian's insistence, occupying a suite of rooms near the gardens where she could watch the flowers bloom when spring arrived. The physician continued his visits, and her health continued to improve until by February she was strong enough to walk through the grounds unassisted, marveling at the grandeur of a world she had never expected to inhabit. I remember finding her one afternoon in the rose garden, wrapped in a fur-lined cloak Sebastian had given her, her face lifted to the weak winter sun. "I never dreamed," she said when she saw me approach. "Neither did I." She took my hand and held it tightly. "You deserve this," she said, "every bit of it. Do not let anyone convince you otherwise." "I am trying," I admitted. "Some days are harder than others. Of course they are. You are rewriting the story of your life, Eleanor. That is not easy work, but you are doing it, and I am so proud of you I could burst." I leaned my head on her shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of lavender and wool. "I could not have done any of this without you," I said. "Nonsense. You would have found a way. You always find a way." She paused. "But I am glad I am here to see it." The engagement period lasted 3 months, longer than Sebastian would have preferred, but necessary to allow for the social formalities that even we could not entirely escape. Announcements were made, invitations were sent, dresses were fitted and refitted as I tried to transform myself from chambermaid to duchess. The wedding took place on a mild March morning, the first hints of spring visible in the budding trees and the early flowers pushing through the ground. It was a small affair, deliberately so. We invited only those who had shown us genuine support, those whose friendship we valued and whose judgment we respected. The rest of society could read about it in the papers. I wore white silk, simple and elegant, with a long veil that had belonged to Sebastian's mother. My own mother walked me down the aisle, her arm steady despite her recent illness, her eyes bright with tears she did not bother to hide. Sebastian waited at the altar, dressed in his finest coat, looking at me as if I were the most precious thing he had ever seen. The ceremony itself passed in a blur. I remember saying the vows, meaning every word with a fervor that surprised me. I remember the weight of the ring on my finger, different from the engagement ring but equally meaningful. I remember Sebastian's kiss, gentle and promising, as the vicar pronounced us man and wife. But what I remember most clearly is the moment afterward, when we turned to face our small gathering of guests, and I caught my mother's eye. She was smiling, a smile of pure, uncomplicated joy, and in that moment I felt the full weight of everything we had overcome. The years of struggle, the nights of fear, the impossible odds that had somehow bent in our favor. We had made it. Against all expectations, against all reason, we had made it. The months that followed our wedding were the happiest of my life. Sebastian and I settled into a rhythm, learning the landscape of each other's hearts, building a partnership that was stronger for all the obstacles we had faced. We argued, of course. No two people can share a life without disagreement. But our arguments were the productive kind, the kind that led to understanding rather than resentment. I took to my duties as Duchess with more ease than I had expected. The staff, once skeptical, became genuinely loyal as they saw the changes I implemented. The local tenants, too, responded to my efforts to improve their living conditions. I visited the sick, organized food distributions during lean times, established a school for the estate children that welcomed both boys and girls. Sebastian watched these efforts with pride, supporting me in every endeavor, never once suggesting that I was overreaching my position. "What about society?" I asked him one evening, as we sat together in the library that had become our sanctuary. "Are you not concerned that my charitable work will be seen as common?" He laughed. "My darling wife, I stopped concerning myself with society's opinion the moment I followed you through the darkness and saw who you truly are. Let them think what they will. We know the truth. And what is the truth? That you are the finest duchess this estate has ever had. That you are changing lives, making differences that will outlast us both. That I was the luckiest man in England when you agreed to marry me." I reached over and took his hand, marveling as I often did at the unlikely path that had brought us together. "I was the lucky one," I said. "You saved me when I had nothing." "No." He shook his head firmly. "You saved yourself. You kept your mother alive through sheer determination. You maintained your dignity and integrity in circumstances that would have broken most people. All I did was see you. All I did was recognize the treasure that was hidden in plain sight. Still, I said, without you, we would have lost everything. And without you, I would have continued to exist as a hollow man, going through the motions of life without ever truly living. Sebastian's eyes were serious now, intense. You woke me up, Eleanor. You reminded me that there was joy to be found in this world, that grief does not have to be permanent, that it is possible to love again after loss. That is not a small thing. I moved closer to him, resting my head on his shoulder. We saved each other, I said. Yes. He kissed the top of my head. I suppose we did. Summer came, then autumn, then another winter, milder than the one before. My mother's health stabilized, and she became a fixture of the household, beloved by servants and family alike. She spent her days in the garden during fair weather, and by the fire during foul, always ready with advice or encouragement or gentle criticism as the situation required. You have done well, she told me one afternoon as we sat together in her sitting room. I watched you, you know, during those first difficult months. I watched you struggle and doubt and fear, and I watched you overcome it all. You have become the woman I always knew you could be. I learned from the best, I replied. She smiled, a smile that held the weight of all our shared history. You learned from yourself, she said. I merely pointed you in the right direction. The seasons turned again, and with them came changes I had not anticipated. In the spring of our second year of marriage, I began to feel strange. Not ill exactly, but different. Tired in ways that sleep could not cure. Emotional in ways that caught me off guard. And then, one morning, I was sick in my basin, and suddenly everything made sense. The physician confirmed what I had begun to suspect. I was with child. Sebastian's reaction to the news was everything I could have hoped for and more. He wept, which I had not expected. He laughed, which I had. He held me as if I were the most fragile thing in the world, and also the strongest, his face buried in my hair, his voice thick with emotion. I never thought, he began, then stopped, unable to continue. I know, I said, stroking his back. I know. After Charlotte, after the baby, I had convinced myself that this part of my life was over, that I would never be a father, never hold my own child in my arms. And now you will. He pulled back to look at me, his eyes shining with tears. Are you happy? He asked. I am terrified, I admitted, and overwhelmed, and so happy I do not know how to contain it. He kissed me then, a kiss that tasted of salt and promise. We will do this together, he said. Whatever comes, we will face it together. The months of my pregnancy passed slowly, each day bringing new worries and new wonders. Sebastian hovered constantly, solicitous to the point of annoyance, insisting I rest when I wanted to work, bringing me treats from the kitchen, reading to me in the evenings when my eyes grew too tired to focus on the page. My mother was equally attentive, sharing stories of her own pregnancy, offering advice both practical and emotional. I thought often of the woman I had been 3 years earlier, the frightened girl who had crept through the darkness, carrying scraps of food to keep her mother alive, who had hidden her struggles, her fears, her hopes from everyone around her, who had believed herself unworthy of love, of happiness, of anything more than survival. That girl seemed like a stranger now. I was no longer hidden. I was no longer alone. I had a husband who loved me, a mother who supported me, a household that respected me, and a child growing within me who would inherit not just titles and estates, but a legacy of love and courage. The labor came in the early hours of a September morning, just as the first autumn leaves were beginning to fall. It was long and difficult, harder than I had expected, And there were moments when I was not certain I would survive it. But Sebastian stayed by my side throughout, holding my hand, wiping my brow, whispering words of encouragement even when I was too exhausted to respond. And then, just as the sun rose over the hills of Devonshire, casting golden light through the windows of the birthing chamber, I heard a cry. Small and fierce and unmistakably alive. "A girl," the midwife announced. "A healthy baby girl." Sebastian took her first, cradling her in his arms with an expression of such wonder that I began to weep. He brought her to me, placing her on my chest, and I looked down at her tiny face, her screwed-shut eyes, her perfect miniature fingers, and I knew that this was what my whole life had been leading toward. "She is beautiful," Sebastian whispered. "Just like her mother." "She is everything," I replied. "Everything I never knew I wanted." We named her Margaret Charlotte, after the two grandmothers she would never meet except through stories. My mother wept when she heard and held her namesake with hands that trembled with joy. "You have given me more than I ever dreamed," she said to me that evening, as the baby slept peacefully in her cradle. "A home, a family, a future. I do not have words to express what it means." "You gave me life," I replied. "Everything I have, everything I am, is because of you." "No." She shook her head, just as Sebastian had. "Everything you have, everything you are, is because of you. I simply loved you. The rest, you did yourself." The years that followed were not without challenges. Society never fully accepted me, though the birth of our daughter softened some of the harshest critics. There were whispers, always whispers, about the Duke who had married his chambermaid, about the Duchess who still visited the servants' quarters, about the unconventional household that defied so many expectations. But the whispers faded to background noise, easily ignored in the face of the life we were building. We had 2 more children, boys both, strong and healthy, and full of mischief. Sebastian proved to be a devoted father, far more hands-on than most men of his station, insisting on spending time with his children every day, teaching them to ride and read and think for themselves. I raised them without the rigid class distinctions that had defined my own childhood, ensuring they understood that a person's worth was measured not by birth, but by character. My mother lived to see all 3 of her grandchildren born, and to hold each of them in her arms. She passed peacefully in her sleep on a spring night, with flowers blooming outside her window and her family gathered around her bed. I mourned her deeply, as I knew I always would. But the grief was tempered by gratitude, by the knowledge that she had lived her final years surrounded by love, that she had seen her daughter happy, that she had known, truly known, that everything she had sacrificed had been worthwhile. On the day of her funeral, as I stood beside her grave with Sebastian's arm around me and my children solemn at my side, I thought about the night everything had changed, the night I had crept through the darkness to feed my dying mother, never suspecting that I was being watched. The night Sebastian had stood in the shadows and wept, his frozen heart beginning to thaw. If someone had told me then what the future held, I would not have believed them. A duke's love, a duchess's title, children of my own. A life beyond anything I had dared to imagine. But the future is always unimaginable until it becomes the present. And the present, I had learned, was worth fighting for. The graveside service ended, and the mourners began to disperse. But I remained a moment longer, looking down at the simple headstone that marked my mother's final resting place. "I did it, Mama," I whispered. "Everything you asked of me. I lived. I loved. I found happiness. I hope, wherever you are, that you can see it. That you know." A breeze stirred the spring air, carrying with it the scent of flowers and the distant sound of birdsong. It felt, absurdly, like an answer. I turned away from the grave and walked back toward Ashford Manor, toward Sebastian and the children, toward the life we had built from the ruins of our separate sorrows. "You are all right?" Sebastian asked quietly when I reached him. "I am," I said. And I found that I meant it. He took my hand, and our children gathered close, and together we walked into the future. I am an old woman now, writing these words by candlelight as the fire burns low and the winter wind rattles the windows of Ashford Manor. Sebastian sleeps peacefully in the next room, his hair silver, his face lined but still handsome, his heart still as true as it was on the night he followed me through the darkness and found something worth believing in. Our children are grown, with families of their own. Margaret, my firstborn, is a grandmother herself now, though she still visits every Sunday for tea. The boys have made their own ways in the world, one a physician who serves the poor, the other a reformer who fights for workers' rights. They are my legacy, every bit as much as the titles and estates they will inherit. I have had a remarkable life, not an easy one perhaps, but remarkable nonetheless. I have known poverty and wealth, despair and joy, loss and love. I have been a chambermaid and a duchess, a daughter and a mother and a grandmother. I have fed my dying mother by candlelight and danced in ballrooms filled with aristocrats who would have shunned me if they had known my origins. And through it all, I have been loved, truly, deeply, completely loved by a man who saw me when I was invisible, who believed in me when I could not believe in myself, who risked everything to build a life with me. That is no small thing. There were moments in those early days when I wondered if I had made a mistake, if the gap between Sebastian's world and mine was too wide to bridge, if I would spend my life as an outsider, tolerated but never accepted, forever marked by my common birth. But I learned over time that acceptance from others matters far less than acceptance from oneself. I learned that the only approval worth seeking is the approval of those you love and who love you in return. I learned that happiness is not a destination, but a choice, one you must make again and again every day, in the face of all the obstacles the world throws in your path. And I learned that love, real love, is not a fairy tale. It is hard work and compromise and occasional heartbreak. It is choosing someone again and again, even when they frustrate you, even when they disappoint you, even when it would be easier to walk away. It is building something together, brick by brick, day by day, until what you have created is stronger than either of you could have been alone. I do not know how many more winters I have left. The cold settles in my bones more deeply with each passing year, and there are mornings when rising from my bed feels like more effort than it is worth. But then Sebastian wakes beside me and reaches for my hand, and smiles that crooked smile that first captured my heart half a century ago. And I remember that every day is a gift. Every moment is precious. Every sunrise is a chance to choose love, choose hope, choose joy. I began this story by saying that I learned to become invisible, that I moved through the world like a ghost, unnoticed and unregarded, hiding my struggles and my sorrows from everyone around me. But I am not invisible anymore. I am Eleanor Ashford, Duchess of Ashford, wife and mother and grandmother. I am the girl who fed her dying mother in a cold cottage, and the woman who danced in the great hall of a duke's mansion. I am every choice I ever made, every risk I ever took, every moment I chose to reach for more than I was offered. And if there is one thing I want those who read this story to understand, it is this. You are not invisible either. No matter how small you feel, no matter how insignificant, no matter how convinced you are that no one sees you or cares about you or believes in you, someone does. Someone will. You just have to be brave enough to let them. The candle is guttering now, and my hand grows tired from writing. But before I set down my pen, I want to add one final thought. That night, so many years ago, when Sebastian followed me through the darkness and discovered my secret, he wept. He has told me many times since that he wept because he saw something beautiful, something pure, something that reminded him that love still existed in this world. But I think there was more to it than that. I think he wept because he recognized himself in me. Two lonely souls, carrying burdens too heavy to bear alone, hiding their true selves from a world that would not understand. He saw me, yes, but I saw him too. And that, I believe, is what love truly is. Not just being seen, but seeing in return. Not just being known, but knowing. Not just being chosen, but choosing. We chose each other, Sebastian and I, against all odds, against all reason, against the judgment of a world that insisted we could not be. And in choosing each other, we found something that neither of us had ever expected to find. We found home. The fire has burned to embers now, and the night has grown quiet outside my window. Sebastian is calling for me, his voice gentle with age but still carrying the warmth that drew me to him all those years ago. I am coming, I call back. Just one more moment. I set down my pen and look at the pages spread before me. A lifetime condensed into words. A story of shadows and light, of fear and courage, of loss and love reclaimed. It is finished now. My story, told at last. And as I rise from my chair and walk toward the bedroom where my husband waits, I find myself smiling. Not because the ending is happy, though it is. Not because the struggles are over, though they are. But because I know, with a certainty that goes beyond words, that every moment of pain, every night of fear, every impossible obstacle was worth it. It was all worth it, for this, for him, for us, for love.